New one. So before we start, I'd like to introduce guests, and I'm going to say that Elaine is not a guest anymore. Jen can.
You're still welcome.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh gosh, yes. How would that table survive without her?
I know.
Jen Kennedy's not a guest anymore, but welcome, Jen. And Matt, I want you to introduce Aaron.
Aaron Pond is my guest today. He's actually a former Rotarian in the Waterbury Rotary. She's the branch manager for Community Bank at the Cottonwood location.
Across the street.
Across the street.
Almost.
Welcome, Aaron.
Aaron, thanks for coming. You get to check us out 2 or 3 times, then let us know if you want to join, because we'd love to have you. That would be great. So we're going to start with a Rotary Minute that Andrew's going to offer.
Forgive me if it's 2 minutes. I want to tell you about my first job. In 1969, I would thumbing around Europe, and my father trying to reach me to tell me that I had a fantastic job. Anyway, I got home and was on a plane the next day to Hamilton, Bermuda, and on the front desk. And those of us, the front desk and reservations and accounting people, all ate in the main dining room. We got fed free food as much as we want whenever. We were waited on. It's incredible. But once a week at lunchtime, there was this club meeting going on at the other part of the dining room. And it was Hamilton Rotary Club. So they do their thing. We just do our fast. We pretty much ignore them. But they did have a song. And it was a welcome song to guests, other Rotarians. And it basically ended up, I can't remember the whole thing. I'm not going to sing the whole thing to you. But it ended up with Hamilton Rotary greets you. Come again, come again, come again. That was basically the end of the song.
And that was your introduction.
That was my introduction.
Thanks, Andrew. That's fascinating.
Come again, come again, come again.
That's nicely done. So we have another guest.
Richard Gagne from Vermont, Dismas Vermont.
Oh, perfect, Richard. We look forward to it. Susan's going to offer us an inspiration this morning.
Well, in light of it being the new year, I thought I'd offer some thoughts from wise people about hope, optimism, and taking action. So the first quote I wanted to share is from Helen Keller. Optimism is the faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence. And the Dalai Lama has said, optimism doesn't mean that you are blind to the reality of the situation. It means that you remain motivated to seek a solution to whatever problems arise. And the historian Howard Zinn wrote, to be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. And in light of January and upcoming Martin Luther King Day, in his sermon at Temple Israel of Hollywood in 1965, I think this is a quote we've all heard before, but when our days become dreary with low hovering clouds of despair, and when our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, let us remember that there is a creative force in this universe, working to pull down the gigantic mountains of evil, a power that is able to make a way out of no way and transform dark yesterdays into bright tomorrows. Let us realize the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And then just to conclude with a contemporary, Melinda French Gates, optimism isn't a belief that things will automatically get better. It is a conviction that we can make things better. And as Rotary, our people of action, these are good things for us to keep in mind.
Thank you. Would you make about 350 copies of that quote from Zinn and send it to everyone in Congress, please? So just a couple of business things. Jude Hersey is very ill. She has pneumonia and she's at home. And so we are all going to personally wish her well. Having said that, she is relinquishing her responsibility for RILA this year. So we're going to need someone who's willing to head up the RILA team. For those of you who don't know, RILA is the Rotary Youth Leadership Award. It's a weekend in June for, it was for sophomores. It may have been expanded to sophomores and juniors, but it's a weekend at what was formerly Linden State College. Forget what it's called now, Lindenville, Vermont State University, whatever. Northern Vermont University, thank you. But it's a weekend where the kids that are chosen go and learn leadership skills. Every Rotary club in the area sends students. We have sent 2 or 3 in the past. There's an application and interview process. So that whoever heads it up would be the point person to get the applications and get them out to, we send them to the counselors at Mount Mansfield and CVU, but we also make them available to homeschooled kids as well. It's not a huge responsibility, it doesn't take an awful lot of time, but Barbara LeWinter has said that she will tutor whoever would like to take it on to let them know the steps, the things that have to happen. So please give it some thought. Let me know if you might be interested in heading it up. It will take a team of probably 3 or 4 people because of the interview process. Now, parenthetically, for the last 2 or 3 years through the pandemic, they stopped doing it. Last year when it was available, nobody applied. What I noticed in the past was that students who had done it, say in a previous year, would counsel other students and tell them how wonderful it was and you should go, because there hasn't been anybody going for the last few years. There's nobody out there to encourage them. So we try to get the guidance counselors to talk it up, and because it's always wonderfully attended, greatly enjoyed. We've had our previous RILA students come and speak to us afterwards and tell us what a great experience they had. So I'm hoping that we can get some interested students to go this year. Anyway.
Sally, can I
Yeah.
say something? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the students are coming from basically 3 places, from New Hampshire, Vermont, and Canada. And they're usually anywhere between 70 and 100 students that attend. We usually have a group of 3 people from the club who interview the students. So I'm hoping that somebody will step forward and offer to head this committee, and I will be happy to mentor them and put them in touch with the guidance counselors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay?
Thanks, Barbara. So think about it and think if you would either like to head it up or if you'd like to just be part of the RILA team. we should get it started fairly soon because don't the applications come out in March, maybe, Barbara?
The application, we actually redid some of the applications. We do have them. But we work through our district and I will find out who's in charge this year. And that person will be in communication with whoever heads up the committee.
Okay, great. Yep, because there is a bit of a time crunch to get everybody interviewed
But
by,
usually we interview the end of April, beginning of May.
Yep.
And, yeah.
okay, there's one other thing that I need to study a little more before yes, Marty. The question is, that you need anything from us? And I don't know, because I couldn't tell from her what she told me how sick she is. She just is sick enough that she didn't want to take on the Ryla thing. So if any of you want to, just give her a call and then let the rest of us know if we need to do anything. There is a Rotary International email that I have to study a little bit more, but there is an opportunity for Rotarians to sign up to volunteer to support and maybe house some Ukrainians. I will find out more about that for you and let you know next week. And without further ado, Ted Kenny is our speaker chair. He's going to introduce our speaker.
Morning, everybody. Our speaker today is Richard Gagne, and I'm probably going to mess up his titles now, but he is a program director. Is that at Dismas of Vermont, and I think a couple of other titles as well. Dismas of Vermont is a charity that is a really unique and wonderful thing. I don't want to steal too much of Richard's speech, but I want to say a couple things about it. It runs a series of houses that house half people who are just getting out of prison and half college students, or college types, as we finally became to call them. It was started in Tennessee by a Catholic priest, Father Jack Hickey. And he noticed that people were, when they got out of prison in, I'm not sure which city it was in Tennessee, but they would basically be given $5 and like a bus ticket with the clear indication that you are to go somewhere else. Some of you may remember the Westward Ho program that the former owner of Lunig's tried to do to get homeless people to move to California. That didn't work either. But in any event, he saw that there was a need, and so he created this Dismas House in Tennessee. Dismas of Vermont is its own entity. I know that because I was the president of the board when we decided to separate and create our own organization. But it is a wonderful, wonderful organization. It is a wonderful program. Father Jack Hickey had a wonderful phrase that he used one time that just resonated with me, where he said, and I'm going to probably get this completely wrong, but in of those who struggle and the compassion of those who stand with them, people will see God at work and join in. And it's not a religious entity at all, but I found that to be very moving. My family has cooked at Dismas House any number of times. There's a community meal every night where the members of the people who live there have dinner. My daughters have cooked there, and we're going to start that up again actually pretty soon. But it is just a wonderful, wonderful organization that does a lot for reconciliation of people who are finishing up their prison terms and the community. So without further ado, I give you Richard Gagne.
Well, thanks, Ted. And I think you hit on all my key points and you nailed the quote exactly. So good job. How many people here have heard of Dismas House before? Oh, everybody looks like. Okay. Actually, I want to thank you for inviting me back. I don't, to speak with you. I don't know if you remember the last time I spoke with this group. It's probably about 15, 20 years ago. Don't you remember? But I've been involved with Dismas since we started in 1986. So yeah, the last time I spoke with you, probably my hair color was completely a different color. But yeah, it's great to be back here. And it's great to be at this, in this building. Williston Federated Church has a group of people who've been cooking at Dismas House for probably about 15, 20 years or more as well. So besides Ted, any of you been to Dismas House before? Okay, so was it through Williston Federated Church? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so and actually, can somebody tell me, like, how much time do I have?
2 hours.
Well, you say that jokingly, I think, but I can take up 2 hours quite easily. So that's why I think it's important to know.
Speak for 20 and questions for 10.
Okay, we'll try to do that. Okay, so I usually like to tell the story of how Dismas House got started as a way of introducing the idea of Dismas. As Ted mentioned, it was started by a Catholic priest named Father Jack Hickey. He was a chaplain at Vanderbilt University. He had organized Vanderbilt University students to go into the Tennessee State Prison, which was this huge fortress type prison right outside of Nashville. But they would go in there, and this is the men's prison, and they did volunteer work. And so doing things that volunteers might typically do in a prison setting, literacy, probably played some basketball games, but they also spent some time just getting to know men who were incarcerated. And they learned a couple of things. One was that for some men, when it was time for them to get out of prison, they had a place to go. They had a home to go to. And if they had a home to go to, that probably meant that there was family there that could give them some support as they transitioned out of prison. As you can imagine, if a person is incarcerated, if they were living on their own by themselves, and you go to prison for 2 or 3 years, you probably don't have that place to go anymore when it's time to get out of prison. But if you were living with family members, whether that was parents and siblings or spouse and children, they had to continue maintaining a household while you were off in prison. So when it's time to get out, you had a place to go. You had a home to go to, and you had that support of family community. So they got to know men who were incarcerated, and they saw that for those men who had a home to go to and the support of family, their transition out of prison and staying out of prison, was successful more often than not. But for those men who did not have a place to go, right, as Ted mentioned, and I think you probably remember that all those stories from the last time I talked about Dismas House at the Rotary. But for those men who didn't have a place to go, the way things worked in Tennessee, the prison officials would get a set of street clothes, provided them with $20 and transportation from the prison into downtown Nashville, where they get dropped off in front of the Greyhound station. The not so subtle message being, use your $20 and buy a bus ticket. Not a very effective means of reintegrating people back into the community. Father Jack and these university students start seeing those men more often than not come back to prison. So they thought, what if we could find a place where we could live ourselves and invite men who don't have a house to go to and don't have the support of family, they could come and live with us, right? So that this house that we get would be like the home that they don't have. And if some of us are living there, we could be like the family that they don't have, that to give them support as they transition out of prison. So that's what they did. Father Jack, very effective preacher, raised a bunch of money. They found an old house, rundown house, downtown Nashville, fixed it up, and started living there, invited men to come and live with them, and created this sense of a family-like community within the house. Okay, so so one of the things that they did was eat dinner together. And it wasn't just the people living in the house who were creating this sense of a family community. They started inviting people from the wider community to participate in the community life of the house by inviting them to be volunteer cooks for that evening meal. So whether it was an individual, maybe a couple, or a family with children, or a church group or civic organization, they would invite people to come into the house on a once-a-month basis, but filled up the whole monthly calendar with all of this great big group of different folks, right? They would come month after month after month. And as those people, those volunteers came month after month, they became a part of that family-like community as well. So again, we use family as an analogy for the kind of community that we create at Dismas House. So if you have the people living at Dismas House creating a sense of nuclear family, but then when you have this great big group of volunteers, that's like the extended family, like the cousins and the aunts and uncles and so on, right? So why is all that important? I think one of the things is that, you know, when a person commits a crime, they are doing something that does a harm, oftentimes to an individual person or an entity like a business, if it was like stealing something from a store. So they're doing something that harms their relationship with their community. They are acting not in the interest of the community or for the good of the community, but they're doing a harm to the community, right? So there's a kind of brokenness that happens when a person commits a crime, a brokenness in their relation, their good standing, right, with the community. And then when a person is incarcerated, right, they're removed from their community. So that kind of brokenness that happens by the act that they committed is only increased. That kind of brokenness, their relationship with their community, is even more broken by incarceration, right? Because the judge says, okay, you're going to be sentenced from 2 to 4 years. And so off you go to a correctional facility. And a correctional facility is a place where they, right? And I mean they, as opposed to us, right? They are, and we are not. And the community is where we are, and they are not. And so there's a physical separation, a physical divide between us and them. And not only do we use the physical barriers of prison to separate us from them, we use language to distinguish us from them, right? So they become convicts and criminals, right? So we use labels, right? And these things, the physical incarceration and the physical, and the labels, those are messages that a person over time, and this may depend, you know, this will happen in different degrees with different individuals. And it often depends on how long a person is incarcerated. But a person tends to internalize those messages while they're incarcerated. So they begin to understand themselves as being not like us, different from us, because they are a convict or a criminal. That's their self-understanding, right? We all have labels that we apply to ourselves. And for the most part, they tend to be pretty affirming kinds of labels, right? But the most fundamental label that a person who is incarcerated uses to identify themselves is this negative thing, right? That acknowledges that I am not a part of or like the rest of you. So that makes then getting out of prison incredibly anxiety producing, right? Because you're leaving the place where you belong, where you are with everyone who identifies similar to yourself, and you're going to a place where at least the perception is you're not wanted, people hate you, right? So getting out of prison becomes incredibly anxiety producing. We did a video and we were interviewing some people who came to live at Dismas House, and we were interviewing one of the men living at the house, and he said, you know, when I first came to Dismas House, I felt like I was coming to a regular house in a regular neighborhood, but I was not a regular person, right? Okay, so that sense of alienation, of not belonging. So this is why it's so valuable if we, Ted said, he did get one thing wrong. He said half the people. We struggle these days, especially. In the earliest days, it seemed like we were able to get more students to live at Dismas House. Now, we're glad if we can get one student to live at Dismas House, or there's a program called Volunteers for Peace. It's international volunteers. So sometimes we get somebody like, I think there's somebody from Belgium right now that lives at our house on Beale Street in Burlington. So we do have the volunteers in the house, but we always have volunteer cooks. That's something that we have been able to maintain. So the great value of having volunteers involved at Dismas House and in the community at Dismas House is that by their presence, you know, when Ted comes, or any of you who've come to the house, when you showed up at that back door on Beale Street, even and come into the house, you know, with the food that you're preparing or have prepared, and even before you engage a person in conversation who's living in the house, you are communicating an incredibly powerful message. And that message is, I care enough about you, I will enter into relationship with you, right? As I sit down at table, you know, with you and break bread, I am communicating a message of acceptance, right? And that is a healing message for someone who has experienced that kind of brokenness in terms of their relationship with their community, right? You are representing the community saying, you know, we accept you and I care enough about you that I will be in relationship with you. So that's like if you understand that about Dismas House, then you understand the most important stuff, right? Because that's what our mission is to reconcile former prisoners with society and society with former prisoners, right? That word reconciliation, that is what you are engaging in when you volunteer cook and come to Dismas House. You are engaging in reconciliation. Reconciliation is healing a broken relationship, right? If you think about, oh, you knew this couple and then they split up, and then you say, oh, they got back together, they reconciled, right? They healed something that was broken in their relationship. It's the same with people who've been incarcerated, with criminals and the rest of the community, right? So, and the only way to do that is by showing up, is by people being present to each other. So as I said, that is the primary mission of Dismas. How, and I think one of the great things about Dismas is that we appeal to a pretty broad spectrum of folks, and it's like, I don't know, if is it like not okay to bring up politics at Rotary Club? Well, no, but I'm not going to say anything that I think anybody will find offensive in terms of political stuff, but I think we have a pretty broad appeal, right, across the political spectrum, because on the one hand, if a person tends to be more of a bleeding heart, they really respond to that idea of being in that personal relationship and you know, like that, and you know, that message about, you know, healing the broken relationship. And for folks who tend to be more on the conservative end of the political spectrum, we're not the government doing this, right? This is a program of people in the community doing direct action for the community, and we're not a government agency, right? So that's a big plus for folks who tend to be a little bit more on the right. So we, I think, have a pretty broad or pretty broad appeal, depending on how you want to look at things. And so another thing, you know, related to that then is that Dismas House is a kind of organization that people can get directly involved in. So yes, we need people to support us through contributions, right? Because we're not a government agency, we have to raise funds. And it's not that we don't get some funding from the state, we do, but we're still a nonprofit organization that, you know, we do a lot of fundraising. But it's also a kind of organization that ordinary people can get involved in. In other words, many organizations that do the kinds of things that we do, the people involved are hired staff people like myself. So we obviously there are some hired staff people to run the show, but for the most part, right, the mission at Dismas House is being accomplished by volunteers, by people who get involved in the organization. And people can get involved in many different ways. People can get involved as volunteer cooks, right? Coming once a month, either on their own, with their own family, or with a group. People get involved because we have like a local board of directors, as Ted had mentioned earlier, because, you know, he's been a part of that. So there's that kind of leadership role that a person can play. And something that is relatively new for our organization, something that we're excited about developing, is developing new volunteer roles where people can work on an individual basis. Maybe someone, even though they might be 30 years old, has never held down a job and could use some support finding employment and developing sort of work habits. So maybe for someone, you know, working with an individual around employment, you know, would be right up your alley. Or maybe it's managing finance. There are some people who come to live at Dismas House who have never had a bank account and wouldn't know how to use a debit card. So there are a number of those kind of like life skills that we are looking to recruit volunteers who would be willing to work one-on-one with individuals. Now, sometimes people ask, well, what about like doing a class? And our sense is that working one-on-one is going to be much more effective than trying to do a class, because you know, some people, the kind of skills that we're talking about now, some people at Dismas House will have the same level of skills in some areas as you or I. And then others, you know, maybe one or two people won't, right? So it's very difficult to develop like a skills kind of training thing that we would offer to everybody in the house at the same time, because not everybody needs the same kind of support and those kinds of things. So, so we have this great big spectrum of ways in which people can get involved at Dismas House. And, you know, if this sounds of interest to any of you, I'd be happy to, you know, to connect with you around getting involved. Okay, so I probably used up my 20 minutes and want to see if you have any questions. Yes.
So do you have any formal mechanism to do follow-up with the people that, for better words, graduate out of the house?
Yeah. We've tried to do that. It's very challenging to keep up with people. There are some folks who stay connected with us over time. We have some people who stay involved and become volunteers at Dismas House. But in general, it's been very challenging for us. We've tried to do that in the past without much success. But, you know, actually, you know, now that with things like with more and more people using social media, that has become, it's a little bit easier to do some of that staying connected thing through social media. Yes. Ah, very good.
It's such a joy to hear from you again today. I'm so excited that the word about Dismas House is being spread far and wide. Williston Federated Church, as you noted, we so value the opportunity to be a part of the important work that takes place at Dismas House. In fact, I'm scheduled this afternoon to meet with yet another potential volunteer from our congregation to help out Dismas House. And you've given me even more ammunition for that conversation. For that, I'm grateful. And I'm so grateful that my Rotary colleagues can be inspired to participate as well, because indeed what you're doing is God's work.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Okay, great. So we have two locations in the Burlington area on Beale Street and one location in Winooski on East Allen Street. And we can have up to 10 people on Beale Street, 11 people at East Allen. And so we usually stay pretty full. Usually if we have an empty bed, it's just like a transition between when one person leaves and the next person comes. And we ask people to make a minimum commitment to stay 3 months. And then after that, it's open-ended. And so people usually leave when they feel like they're ready to transition on. On average, people stay about 6 or 7 months. But we've had people stay multiple years. Yes. Yes, there. So we have, well, our houses used to be mixed gender up until about 3 or 4 years ago. Now they're single gender. So the two houses here in Burlington are both for men. But Rutland has a men's Dismas House and a women's Dismas House. And the women's Dismas House, since it's the only one in the state, is open to taking women from all over the state. And we also have a Dismas location in Hartford, Vermont. So, yes. Yes, yeah.
So, you decide who you'd like to move there or be part of, and other expectations of the people coming.
Yes. Okay, thanks for asking those questions. So we have a referral process. We take people who are under the supervision of the Vermont Department of Corrections, federal probation and parole, and drug court. So usually, for a person to be an applicant to live at Dismas House, they have to be referred to us by one of those agencies. But we, for instance, but most of the people who come to live at Dismas House are folks in the Vermont correctional system, right? And so when we get a referral, we set up an interview. So we do a Zoom interview. We used to go to the facilities to interview people in person, but since COVID happened, we do Zoom now. But it's like a 1-hour interview where and one of the things that I stress with people is that, this is only going to work out if we've made a mutual decision. In other words, you chose us and we chose you. Nobody's being forced into anything. This is, your free choice and our free choice. And so I spend some time telling them about Dismas House so that they can make an informed decision. They know what it is they're choosing. And then I spend some time asking questions, and we do like a life history, talk about growing up and their work history, but also how did you come to be in prison, right? What did you do? One of the things that I think is important, we talk about reconciliation as being this end result of living at Dismas House. That's our mission. But I think it is important that people take responsibility, right, for what they've done. So that's part of that process. To me, reconciliation doesn't make sense if a person is not willing to take responsibility for their actions, right? It's like those things are complementary in a way, right? Okay, so anyway, so we go through this interview process, we make a decision about accepting people. And our basic philosophy about accepting people is that, if a person wants to choose us, we ought to let that person come live at Dismas House unless there is a reason to not accept them. So in a way, I'm trying to figure out, is there a reason to not accept this person? Because otherwise, I'm going to accept everybody unless there's a good reason not to. And a good reason not to would mostly be around things like violence. Not just that they had committed a violent act in terms of like the crime committed, but more about like, their behavior while incarcerated. If they have disciplinary reports from 2 months ago where they assaulted somebody, that's not a good sign, right? And so my concern is the safety and well-being of, the other members of our Dismas, community, as well as our neighbors, right? So, so that's how we select people to come in. There is really at this point, no group of people based on offenses committed that we would exclude automatically.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you. And let me know if any of you would like to be involved with Dismas, either as an organization. Like the Burlington Rotary Club has had a group volunteering to cook at Buell Street for many years. So so this works for some groups. Or if individually you would like to be involved, either as a volunteer cook or with like one of those life skill areas, I'd be happy to talk with anybody individually as well.
Great.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you so much. Everybody gets tired of hearing me quote Brian Stevenson, but Brian Stevenson says we are all more than the worst thing we've ever done. It's important to remember that. And we're probably all going to borrow or rent a bus for Ted Kenny. So the next time he goes to Dismas, we can all go and cook a meal. So before we start with the fines, Richard, I'm gonna ask you to do one thing for us. If you would pick one of these tickets and read the